Welcome to Psychic Girls Next Door. We are your hosts, Shannon Miller
and Lily Hibarino. This podcast is for all spirituality enthusiasts and psychics next door to share tools, experiences, and spiritual practices that align with their highest vibrational self.
On today's episode, we are honored to have Reverend Jessica Sharp. Jessica is a spiritual counselor providing several types of healing services, such as sound baths, which I've definitely have attended, and I think I've talked about on this podcast before. She also provides psychic readings and herbal remedies, and she also is a death doula, specializing in the transition and closures. So Jessica, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure and a joy, and also just really appreciate it because we've also been trained in the same psychic tools together. So it's always good to be around people who use the same tools.
Yeah.
We feel the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to ask the first question?
Sure. Yeah. So Jessica, we would just like to start off by just learning more about your background, like where you grew up, your educational background, religion or spirituality that you follow, your astrological sign, if you want to share, your human design, if you also know it, or anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners.
Great. Yeah. So I was born in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I was raised in the Mormon religion and culture. My family left the Mormon church when I was very young, but just like if you were to grow up in the Vatican, you would identify as Catholic growing up in Utah. I'm culturally Mormon, even though I haven't been spiritually Mormon for a long time. And I went to school in Boston where I studied journalism, photojournalism, and I had this really exciting opportunity to work for the Boston Globe while I was there, which was really wonderful. But I decided to marry my high school sweetheart, and I moved back to Utah at the same time as the recession in 2008, 2009. And I actually got a job as a nanny, and the woman I was a nanny to was a crisis manager, and she trained me how to be a crisis manager. So I went from changing diapers to building data centers and presenting in boardrooms. So in my early 20s, I became a disaster planning, disaster management, disaster crisis, disaster recovery expert for Fortune 500 companies.
Oh my God. I didn't even know that.
Yeah, I know.
That's
this is like totally,
one of your past lives.
It's one of my past lives that's still in this body and this life.
A 180.
Yeah.
Completely.
So I worked with airlines, hospitals, banks, financial institutions, like many of the major ones, doing large scale disaster planning across their data center, people, processes, facilities. And I wanted to move into innovation. So I moved over to Salesforce, and I actually had like 5 different jobs when I was there.
Oh, nice.
And I started as a crisis manager. I moved into product management, marketing. I worked in philanthropy, sales, marketing. And it was at that time when I really wanted to just explore, like, how could this through line that I now have identified as me as like a peacemaker.
Yeah.
Like, how can I really leverage this to the best use for myself and the people around me? And I was in sales at the time, and I just realized how few social spaces I actually felt comfortable and invited and safe in. And so I left Salesforce to start my own mindful events company. I started New Era with my business partner, Cynthia, who also introduced me to the psychic work and also went through the psychic training with me. So I had a legal cannabis business where we hosted mindful events, and we invited people to use low doses of cannabis rather than having alcohol present in the spaces. And I was doing that when COVID, and then during that time, I also went to sound healing school because one of the events we hosted was sound healing, and I was just like, wow, this is so amazing. I got to do more of this. So I went through sound healing school, and then COVID happened, and we couldn't host events. And so we took a step back, and that's when I went through psychic school. And I would say that I made a really big transition at that time because it's something like I found it and it was just so helpful. I just kept going. And then I like woke up and I was a minister. Like, it was like, I just kept going because I needed it for my sanity during COVID. And then all of a sudden I realized like, oh, I'm a minister now. Like I've been given this opportunity. And so I've made a pretty dramatic shift in how I've thought about it and approached my life and my work. As a byproduct of that, I've now started my own church entity called Earth Body Church.
Nice.
And I do my sound healing and psychic work and death work and medicinal work under that umbrella. And I think that's something that I offer that I'm really passionate about is like systems and healing systems and both at the individual, like myself in relationship to myself, in relationship to my soul, in relationship to spirit within myself, but then also interpersonal. So in relationship with others, and then in groups and communities and in organizations. Mm-hmm. So I'd say like my through line in my life is around like peacemaking and like, how can I look at that in the concentric circles of self to other to community? I'm a Capricorn. That's my sun rising.
Same here.
Yeah. Many of my signs, though, my other signs are in like Sagittarius. So,
okay. Yeah.
Yeah. That's as far as I've gotten. I'm still getting into the astrology, zodiac stuff. There's so much. There's so much there.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love looking at people's birth charts. So let me know.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. So that's what's kind of guided me and led me and how I've stumbled through life up until this point and how I've organized myself.
I love how you say stumble, but I feel like I can tell you're a systems thinker because I also am a systems thinker. And just like how you found that like common thread as being a peacemaker through all of your career experiences and like let's talk about like the spiritual aspect. When did you know that you like, obviously you grew up Mormon, from what you've told us today and from what we took the minister class together. So I knew that you were Mormon. Like, when did you first discover that like you were a spiritual being or you wanted to connect more to energy work, to, the space of like the intangible? Like, how old do you think you were? Or did you ever have any like aha moments where you're like, I need to just like transition out of the corporate world and do this type of work? I know that's like a few different questions.
No, I think I think that's really helpful. And the thing so my answer to that is, let me just pause.
Yeah.
So, my relationship to spirituality is very split. Mm-hmm. In the Mormon culture and in the Mormon belief system, which I was raised in, my father is white. He's from Utah, and my mother is Korean. She came over from Korea to marry my father. My father had served a Mormon mission in Korea. He went back to visit, and that's when he met my mother, and then they shortly married after. And so the Mormon tradition explicitly states that it is the job for men to speak to God and for women to bear children. So that's kind of an important component that really came out in my ministry class and still really impacts me deeply. And so when I think of that question, when I think of that question, I kind of come back to like there was a point in which my conditioning shed enough that I could start to say like, I'm a woman that talks to God and doesn't have children.
Right.
And like, I didn't have examples of what that was growing up. And I was also explicitly told by everyone around me that was like not a thing.
Right. Constantly invalidating.
Also that it was not of God.
Right.
Like it's actually a direct rebellion in some ways.
Oh yeah. No, that makes sense if you think about like how the programming is in that cult and,
the programming in that culture that I was raised in and grew up in. So I did also leave when I moved to the Bay. I married my high school sweetheart, my Mormon high school sweetheart. So there was a time when I moved around and when I was at Salesforce, basically.
Yeah.
When I went through my divorce with my Mormon ex-husband.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, like there's like, I can be a spiritual being as a woman.
Yeah.
And also like, I don't have to have children, like to be of God. So like where it was like, that became like very clear and solid for me. also because I wasn't married to my Mormon husband anymore. I had chosen divorce. I had chosen to split off of what was viewed as good and right by my upbringing.
Yeah.
At the same time, I was raised by a Korean mother. And my mother is very clairvoyant. She actually also went through Psychic Horizons after I did. Yeah. It's so funny. Yeah. My mom is very clairvoyant. And in Korean culture, they still have a tradition of shamanism, mudangs, and manshins, who are clairvoyant. And it's very interesting because the female shamans in Korean culture, in the 1400s, they were deemed the same as the slave class. So in public, in Korean culture, and this still exists today. So there's modern day Korean shamans still today. Like this is a tradition that has continued despite being made a slave class, despite Christianization of Korea, despite the Japanese invasion, despite Confucianism and Chinese coming in. Like this line of shamanism was actually started from the very first group of humans who went and established Korea.
That's amazing.
And so it's very deep, it's very underground, and it's actually matrilineal. And I carry actually 2 matrilineal spiritual lineages, Korean shamanism and Psychic Horizons.
I love that.
And I think that's something that maybe we're not as aware, but Psychic Horizons is a matriarchal spiritual lineage.
Yeah. Yeah,
So-
no, it definitely is.
It is so that's kind of interesting because they're rare and they're underground.
Yeah, no, totally.
It's just kind of it's interesting to see that. But so my mom was clairvoyant, and growing up, she validated in me my clairvoyant skills, my clairvoyant abilities from a very young age. But she also instilled in me that it was unsafe for anybody besides her to know about it.
Right. She was being protective.
Yeah. Which is fair because across the entire earth for the last few thousand years, women have been burned, killed,
Oh, totally.
Yeah, true.
and kicked out of their communities for having intuitive skills, for using their own intuitive powers.
Right.
So this is also not just this is not just the Salem witch trials. This has also happened in Asia. It's like a universal thing.
Oh,
so
totally.
it's fair. It's reasonable that my mom would say yes, you have these skills, and yes, you have this ability, and yes, there's nothing wrong with it. But also, don't you ever let anybody else know that you can do this.
It's like a family secret.
And even just a secret between me and my mom. I never spoke about spirituality like this with my father either.
Yeah.
So
you just knew that you couldn't go there. Yeah.
Exactly. So, and there was a way in which my internal spirituality in relationship to my intuitive abilities and in my relationship to God was almost inoculated with my mom. So I have a very different internal spiritual experience and an external presenting spiritual experience.
I love how you have so many different layers there. I guess
the answer to that is it has more to do with when I begin to feel comfortable letting other people know how deep my spiritual practices are and go that are in and of and with myself, which I have had since I was a very young person.
Yeah, and I bet you used your intuitive abilities to suss out
my whole life.
Yeah, who can I actually be open with?
Yeah,
it's kind of you. Maybe because we are women and in our DNA somewhere, we know that it is unsafe to share this in out in the open. I wouldn't go in the grocery store and be like, I'm a clairvoyant, even though in San Francisco, no one would really care, probably maybe 2% might be what? But when you are in environments where you're exploring different people who may not have the same type of abilities or type of upbringing. And it's good to be cautious.
Yeah, there's still a stigma around all of this. Psychic women, clairvoyance, and whatever it is related to all of that, and I think that's why we're here. That's what this podcast is about, is to really dismantle all of this very outdated mentality. But I'm also curious, you've mentioned that, so your mom, she knew it. But what about the rest of your family? Are they aware now what you do, and how do they respond or react to it today?
Yeah, great question. So I was raised with 2 brothers. I have a brother and a sister. my sister transitioned. My sister's transgender. And I'm very close with my sister, who I supported through her transgender. We're very close. So she's very aware. I lived with her when I was going through school. So she comes to my events and things. So I'm very close with my sister. But she's also chosen an alternative lifestyle as a transgender person.
Sure.
And I'm very close with my mom. I actually don't really speak with my father very much. He has since returned home to Utah and lives with his Mormon family. My parents are divorced. And I have an older brother who, as an adult, returned back to the Mormon church, has since sort of left logistically, but not really spiritually or energetically in terms of removing himself from the belief systems
and
like sort of
dogma.
Yeah. So I would say, or at least that's my experience of him, and he is uninterested in developing a relationship with me, even though he now lives close and I've reached out multiple times. So it's very gender split in my family regarding where I have space to be who I am and what I know and what I see and what my power is. And it was also it was difficult for my father. I think it is still somewhat difficult for my father to accept to a degree. Again, just going that like the Mormon belief system is that it's men's job to talk to God and women's job to have babies. And there is a direct rebellion. I actually recently went to visit him last year, right after graduating. And when I was there, his Mormon bishop just happened to come and visit. And I remember just having this moment where I was like, this is funny. Like, I haven't seen my dad or spoken to him in many years, and now I show up, and so does the Mormon bishop at the same time.
It's like a magnet.
Yeah, it was like, and I just like had this moment where like I also like recognized that I like had this choice, where I was just like, I was like this moment of introducing myself, and it was like I had this like, which path do you choose? And you know, because I'm like I have a fork in the road of how I want to introduce myself, and I ended up introducing myself as like, hi, I'm Jessica. I'm my father's daughter. And then after the bishop, and then I could tell my father didn't, he was excited to see his kid. So he was like, he kind of ushered the bishop out. And afterwards, I was like, I did not introduce myself as Reverend Jessica Sharp because I didn't want to open that can of worms.
You knew if it was appropriate or not. Just gonna leave it for now.
This is an elephant in the room that I don't need to name necessarily all the time.
And I think that's a good discernment capability, right? Like, it's not dishonoring you or your gifts or your beliefs, but it's like discerning, like, is it safe to share this information or present myself this way? And I think that's a good it's a good skill to have. Regardless.
You just kind of have to pick your battles.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just be selective who you want to share this information with and who you don't want to share this information with. So,
absolutely.
That's great. Great that you stood in your own power,
Yeah. So let's bring it to today. Like, so you have all these different types of healing modalities that you provide to people. Can you tell us a little bit about all of the services that you provide, and what are some of your favorites that you provide to other people?
Yeah, so I'll start with the sound healing. I've been doing that the longest. So I do a monthly cannabis sound bath at Green Yogi, third Friday of the month, and I'm exploring to add some more tea and sound baths, not necessarily with cannabis, although we could still use, if you're somebody who wants to use cannabis for the sound baths, you still can. But I'm thinking about opening it and making it a little bit more inclusive. So I'm going to be doing more tea and sound baths around the Bay Area, including at my own home. So that's something that if people are interested, they can look into. The sound baths are an hour to 2 hours. The whole event is usually 3 to 4 hours or 3 to 6 hours. And I also do psychic reading, so I can do those in person or over Zoom. And sometimes I do both the sound healing and the psychic reading together, where I do the psychic reading to really do the deep looking. And then we use sound as the sort of imprinting of the like clean slate, of the like verification of the like transition to a peace state, and then like an imprinting of that peace state to move it forward. And then I also offer psychedelic consulting. So I have studied and trained under different lineages. And there are plant allies that I work with, cannabis as well as like mushrooms that I advise people with and regarding how to develop our relationships in terms of an energetic relationship, thinking of these plant allies as tools, thinking of them as their own spirits to develop relationships with in respect and in continuity. And then I also do death doula work, which is something that's emerged more recently through my continued apprenticeship with Psychic Horizons. And the focus with this death work is that we're all going to die.
Yeah.
We're all going to die. It's something we all have to go through. When you look at it through the psychic lens, it's something we go through many times. Certainly these bodies into other lifetimes, but also it within our own bodies, with our own identities, with our own attachments. Like death is the process of release and transfiguration and transformation. And the more I've fallen into this and studied and learned, the more I've realized just that death itself is like this. It's like playing Monopoly and you get a get out of jail free card when it comes to your karma.
Yeah.
And around the death process, both approaching it as it's happening and shortly thereafter, there's this very ripe time where you can just really cleanse a tremendous amount of karma. And you can end cycles with people. So create closure, create tremendous healing in relationship to others, in relationship to self, and relationship to what you're moving on to next. Because as we know, energy doesn't die. You do move on to something, right? So the death doula work is focused on helping people see and understand, training people themselves how to move through that process. So in the Taoist belief, you have 5 elemental bodies that dissolve into each other as you're going through death. And you can train yourself to mindfully go through them. So then when you go through death, you can mindfully go through it and cleanse a lot yourself. And then you can also work with psychics, like people like myself, who can guide you and also work with you on the astral shortly after your transition to also just help at just like if you're moving out an apartment, you're going to hire a professional cleaner to come through and clean it up after you. Like that's, you're going to clean it up well, but then you're also going to clean it up,
Yeah.
It's the same thing. So that's also what I work with. So what's interesting is that Psychic Horizons, the specialty I developed during my apprenticeship was these transition readings. And I can work with people who've left their body, longer than 3 days. But that 3-day window, and we see this also in like Hindu cultures and other cultures that have this understanding of reincarnation, that a 72-hour window after leaving your body is like this just extremely ripe time for healing and cleansing. So I'm developing work now to help work with people in their own process, and then also just training and supporting that and more education and awareness, because again, in the Eastern, where I recently went to the Himalayas and did a deeper study, this is like no knowledge that like, oh yeah, we reincarnate. And when you die, it's like you do these things.
Yeah.
But like on Western spiritual traditions, this is like death has become such a taboo topic.
Right.
And it doesn't really serve us, right? And we don't necessarily have to anymore. Like we can't approach it. We all know we're going to die. Like,
we have such resistance to it.
There's so much resistance. Yeah, it doesn't serve us actually.
I think it's like the idea of attachment, right? Like people get very attached to people, to things, to their routine, their lives. And so I think it can be hard. That's like when you think of like the death of an ego, like when you go through something in your personal life that just like really just it changes your life dramatically, whether you want to or not. It can be a death of an ego or a death in general or some type of transition. Like if you were used to like, doing a certain job and then you get fired, that can also be like seen as a death. But I think it's so fascinating that just everything that you do. Like, I think it's just amazing. Like, especially around like, that 3-day period after someone transitions to the astral plane or to the next life. Like, what does that process look like when you are in that space of like reading or helping that person? It's like spirit kind of guiding them to the next place where they're going to go, or what does that really look like from what you've seen?
Yeah. So the way that I experience it is that like I'm basically like a glorified secretary.
I love it.
I'm just a secretary taking notes and sharing those notes.
Okay.
Typically what's most commonly happened is that these readings come to me by loved ones or partners. So I've actually started to set up readings with people now, like my friends who are like, okay, when I die, like we'll do a reading. But when I was in my apprenticeship, they also just came to me through friends and family. And it's very similar to when I'm doing a reading with somebody who's alive, but I'm the only one usually who can hear the person who's passed.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I'm oftentimes sort of I'm not totally giving verbatim voice for them, but what I'm doing is I'm offering at a meta level generally what's happening. That's why I say I'm a secretary, okay, what's happening. So I actually recently did a memorial of a friend who passed, and I worked with him to write what it is that I was going to say about his life at his memorial.
Yeah.
And I actually didn't really share that with a lot of people because ability to talk to the dead is like this sort of misunderstood, also taboo, kind of like a weird thing. Yeah. It's like a can of worms that I don't need to like what's more important is you get the message.
It's not about
because I don't need to run up against your limiting belief statements in order to give you the gift.
True.
Like I just want to give you the gift.
Yeah. Just take the gift.
Yeah. Just take the gift.
So I don't know, like, how would this be different than like a medium? Because since you're talking about like talking to the deceased one.
This is
because
such a great question.
Kind of like it almost looks like it would intersect in a way, but I can see like how it's a very distinct ability per se, right? So
there's differences.
Okay, yeah, I figured that. So maybe if we could just explain like what.
And I think this is actually really good to talk about too, because this also comes up with my animal psychic work.
I love that.
And I'm going to start, first I'm going to explain it through the animal psychic work because then I think it makes more sense afterwards. But basically with the animal psychic work, what I've come to realize is that there are what I'm calling animal communicators and psychics. So there are people out there who are calling themselves animal psychics, but what they're basically doing is they're sort of taking verbatim the communication that's coming from the animal. Mm-hmm. They're a translator. Mm-hmm. Just like if you're watching a UN and somebody's making a speech and then there's a translator who's verbatim telling what's the information that's being said.
Yeah.
That's a communicator. To me, I position myself as a psychic. So like, I'm taking lots of information. I'm taking what you're saying, but more importantly, I'm actually looking at your energy body, and I'm negotiating where we're at, where we're going, what we hope to see next, purely based on your energy body. And I'm taking information of what you're saying as part of it.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. Like, it's more of like a secretary. So when it comes to like the death work, I'm listening, but what's more important is that I'm really looking at the karma lens. So where are you still giving, where's life energy still being transmitted back and forth? Because at a certain point, it's actually not helping to transmit life energy to somebody who's like passed on.
Right.
So it's looking at what's karmically keeping the connections, the pictures there. And then I'm looking at the programming, the pictures, the things at the energy body level that's keeping these patterns, behaviors, and words in place. And I'm offering a programmatic change to those. So it's less a focus on the content and it's more a focus on what's the lens of those contents going through so we can change the lenses instead. So that's more of a metaphysical level than it is a direct communication level. So when I explain to like animal psychic work, it's like, I'm not going to sit down with your dog and ask your dog why it shat on your rug on Tuesday and explain it to you.
Yeah, a lot of owners would love to know that, I'm sure, but
what I will do,
public, you can figure out like why, maybe like the deeper
exactly what I will do is I'll sit in the couch with you and I'll figure out, why did you pick this dog? Why did this dog pick you?
Yeah.
What is at the core of that behavior?
Yeah.
And how can we change the core of the behavior, the core of the understanding that's going to shift the behavior because it's layers deeper than what we're experiencing.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I don't know, I'm learning so much. I never, when you work in this, especially in the psychic world or energy work, and you think about like healing the people that are alive, you as a body in this physical plane. And then just kind of thinking that there is also a venue for not only healing yourself, not only here, but afterwards too, that there's still, opportunities beyond just the physical body. And that's amazing. And I can only imagine too that, when the loved ones, they contact you, right, to do this work. So I'm assuming the person's already probably, in this transitional phase, like pretty much they kind of have a pretty sad picture coming up. Does that influence like any of this work, like their grief and the sadness? Like, does that impact any of this transitional period?
Yeah, absolutely. It does 100%. First, I will also say is that I'm going to talk about consent because I still need and get and receive consent when speaking with dead people.
Oh, yeah.
The way that and that's actually, I'm just going to put a pin on this before answering that, which is like the whole thing of consent because, I've been speaking with so many. It's unfortunately rare for energy healers to be taught to seek, get, and receive consent and continue to check in about consent along the way when they're doing healing energy work. And I think that that's really important.
Yeah.
And I do that when I'm working with babies, with animals, with dead people. And that's like an integrity thing. And
for sure.
And I think it's important to say. And part of that too is then the part of feeling into that is the emotional state of people and what they have the capacity in the physical and the here and now to take in. And so that's part of my job as a secretary, right? So that's part of the information. One of the pieces of information that I'm taking as well is what the emotional state, what's going on in their emotional body, what's also going in their sort of conscious analyzer, what are the signals and signs that they're showing in that moment, and what do they have the capacity to absorb in my sharing of what I'm doing and experiencing. Because as I'm working, as you know, we are communicating about what's going on, but I'm also in my psychic space working. And sometimes too, the level of information that I share, will sort of be determined by what I see in the other person, which includes their emotional state, which choose their openness to hearing. Some people just also want to be healed and they don't want to know how the sausage was made. You know?
Yeah.
So
no, that's true.
You kind of have to feel into that. So I'm going through here, on one aspect of my intention, I'm going to go through and do all the healing steps I know on the astral.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other part of me is how much of what I'm doing over here can I sort of translate and package in a way that's going to feel gentle and kind and absorbable?
Yeah.
And, integrative for them.
Yeah.
Because it's also weird to it'd be weird for me to walk oh, I talk to dead people and I talk to your mom. That's not an aware way of communicating my skill, right? So,
no, for sure. Yeah.
So I'd say that that's part of it. And I think that that's also an important aspect of psychic work and energy work that's also maybe less discussed as well. And that is the difference between what we know we can do at an energy level and what we consciously talk about with others, so that there seems to be a coherence in the gentleness of the giving and receiving of that.
I really love that. I think when I read people, when I would read people at Psychic Horizons, I learned from this guy, Carlos, and he was just such a great reader. When you read with other people and you're I want to do exactly, he just gets in, he pulls out the weed, he gives it to you straight, and but some people don't want that, packaged it like that, if that makes sense. They want it, you can tell intuitively what's appropriate to share versus not. And so when you are, creating space for the family members of the deceased and even for the, the deceased itself, how do you, kind of go through that process of, because in a way you can become a toxic handler, right? So you're handling people's emotions about their past, the person who's passed away, who it's either them who have passed away or the family members who are in the, environment and surrounding the people who have passed away. How do you, go through the process yourself and kind of transmit that energy? And like after you've done the healing work with the families or the person who's passed away, like what is your process to like separate and come back to yourself? Because I can imagine you have to go through some type of process to like, really separate and clean out. And obviously we know this, how to do it from the Psychic Horizons way, but are there any other tools that you use before and after your healings with people?
Yeah, totally. I'm going to answer that. And I just want to also comment on something about the death readings. And that is that I have had one death reading where the person who had passed, I was reading, was actually like quite hostile towards us. It was in a group. It was in school, which was like, yes. But besides that, everybody else who I've worked with who've left their body, the gift of that 72 hours, the gift of leaving is that you are no longer burdened by the suffering that you experienced in this life. You're no longer burdened. So like you're on the other side of the veil and you're like, oh, everything's love. I get it. Like, so
you're not really tapping into like, toxicity.
Yeah. I'm talking, they're
the family members.
Who's usually struggling is not the dead person. Yeah. They're like, oh yeah, great. Like, right. and we also see this like when people are about to die and they get close, they're like, oh God, I gotta forgive everyone. I just gotta forgive everyone. Like that's So usually like the people who passed are easy to tell you. It is the family members that's harder. And sometimes I filter, and I actually do. So like I am talking directly to the person who's passed, and I'm creating the reading is for them, and I'm reading to them and I'm talking to them.
Yeah.
And then I'm taking what's being shared and I'm asking what is appropriate to share about this for the people who are receiving it. And then I'm taking that guidance and then I'm sharing from there.
Yeah.
And that sort of honors that different people are in different places of understanding and different experiences to make it digestible. Accessible.
Yeah.
And then I would say afterwards, so it is very important for me to close out myself, to step away, to say this, okay, close that container.
Yeah.
So I certainly use the Psychic Horizon tools of sort of disconnecting, cleaning up. But then I also use a lot of somatic tools. So I'm working on more psychic somatic work, but being in and of the body. So like I do a lot of like dancing, shaking.
Oh, that's
shaking,
great.
A lot of like shaking work.
Yeah.
Dancing, movement, just tuning in, doing full body scans. And just sitting and feeling into my fingers, feeling into my toes, just like, am I consciously in my body right now? And how can I get consciously in my body right now?
Yeah.
And that's something that I seek to practice multiple times a day, but especially before my readings and after my readings.
Oh yeah.
Because my personal thing is like I've been disassociated. It's very easy for me to disassociate. I'll be off with the dead people, at a rave for like the next few days, and Jessica's body is just like sitting here.
Totally.
So I gotta. It's like for me a lot of the closure and like being able to do this work and be able to do this work and not be blasted by it is from I got to come back into my body. So I need those practices where I get back into my body. And I've luckily surrounded myself with other healing practitioners who focus and are grounded and anchored in somatics.
Yeah.
And so that's like really helpful for me as well.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to take care of yourself before you can care for others.
Yeah. And that was something that really stuck with me that our teacher, Laura Hopper, shared about in one of the classes, is that it's very common for trans mediums to have like health problems because you spend so much time allowing these other channels, other energies and information to come through you that you're not in your body enough to actually care for in the way that it needs to be. So like, I really took that and was like, I'm one of those people.
Right. Yeah. And I think we can all relate to that. Because it's always about the giving. And the giving, but then you also have to like be able to give it to yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. So I just want to pivot a little bit. I just kind of want to rewind a little bit. When was there like a moment where you were in the corporate world and just decided to then transition to being this like soulpreneur want to call it. Was there like a moment when you felt that was your calling, or was it always? And I know that you already kind of like knew it, but when was that decisive moment? You're like, you know what? This corporate world, I've learned, it served me a purpose, but now it's time to move on and really like follow my path. When was like that moment that you realized that?
So that moment was actually, that moment was actually in my early 20s when I had barely entered into the corporate world. So in my early 20s, when I had moved back to Utah to marry my ex-husband, my Mormon ex-husband, he had to finish college in Utah. So that's why we moved back from Boston. And I got a job as a nanny, which in my upbringing, the only 90% of the women I knew were stay-at-home moms.
Yeah.
The 10% who worked were caregivers. Mm-hmm. So they were teachers, or they took care of babies or the elderly, or they were beauticians. That was like the only jobs that women had. So even though I even had gone to college at Boston University studying photojournalism, it hadn't even occurred to me that I had the possibility of having like what I'd call like a professional, like a life outside of caregiving, actually, for others, because I had just never seen that. So when I became a consultant, the woman who trained me to be a consultant and whose company I built with, I got to meet all these executives. I got to meet all these business people. And I always worked with executives in boardrooms. And I was like, it was exciting to me. I was like, oh, there's power, there's money, there's like change, there's like huge systems. I mean, like these are like banks, these are hospitals. Like I worked many years for academic hospital, University of Utah Hospital. Actually, I helped them build multiple data centers, and like we figured out how to keep babies alive if there was an earthquake. Like,
that's so wild.
Using like really intense, actually, like it took a lot, technology and people and assets and positioning and plans. So I was like, this is like, so there's something so like powerful and beautiful in this. Like at some point I would like to be a professional who starts my own business, who like kind of like throws down. It's I'm going to create something that's like interesting. And so, I was either going to go get an MBA or I was going to go into, enterprise world. And I applied to Stanford. I didn't get in. But I had my foot in at Salesforce already. So I was like, well, I'm just going to, and I did. I mean, I learned from more than half of Mark Benioff's direct reports were my mentors.
That's so
like, I think sorry, Stanford, but I actually think I got a better education at Salesforce.
Well, and you got in probably during the time when they were really getting successful.
It was a very wonderful, it was like a very high growth, high impact
you
time
to do a lot.
It was on there. It was a rocket ship that I got a front row seat on. So
that's so cool.
That was, but my time there was always to learn and go.
Yeah.
So that's why I had like 5 jobs. I was in like 3 or 5 different groups. Like I tried to do as many things as I could when I was there, and I did. And so I used that as my jumping off point to then start my business.
Yeah.
And it was when but I didn't quite know what it is that I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And I ended up, one of my mentors took me to Burning Man, and I just had this like aha moment that the social environments that I are like mainstream, that like as like a salesperson, I'm going to go take my client to, like I can take them to a bar, I can take them to a restaurant, or I can take them to the strip club. And I was like, these options suck.
Right.
Like I was like, why aren't there more mindful spaces? I'm not saying that Burning Man is, but it was like this environment where it was like, oh, we can have tea houses. Oh, we can have sober parties. Oh, we can have like more mindful things. And it was like, oh, I can actually like take these things and put them smack dab like in the middle of our spaces. And that was really exciting to me. This like prospect of being able to create the social environments that I myself would want to participate in.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And just amazing how like it almost like all these puzzle pieces all come together. You know, you're like, oh, it fits here. Oh my gosh, it fits here too. You know, and just create your own little puzzle. I love that. Yeah. But where can we find you, Jessica? Your website, social media?
Great question. So I am on Instagram as Jessicca Lee, or if you just search Rev Jessica Sharp, you can find me. And I like to post about meditation and tips and tools and stuff, and also poems. And I also post about my upcoming events on there. So it's a great place to follow me. And then I do have a website, revsharp.earth, where you can learn more about my offerings. And I will be updating it soon with the death doula work.
Nice. Awesome. Thank you so much, Reverend Jessica, for being with us today. I've learned so much about you, and I've just enjoyed every moment of it. And I can't wait to continue to attend your events. They're amazing. I said at the beginning, like, I saw one of my angels when I was at your sound healing, and I don't really see my guides too often, but when I was in that space that we were in, I was like, oh, that's one of my fallen angels. Like, that's a spirit guide for me. And I think that's like, when I can have something new pop up, and you provided that space with Cynthia. And I think it's such a beautiful thing that both of you are doing, but especially like all of the work that you're doing. It's going to be so impactful for everyone it touches, and then everyone who they interact with. It's just constant, like, pull thread, and this creating this web of healing for people. I think that's very beautiful.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here and just sharing your energy, your time with us. And we hope that you guys also enjoy this such expansive episode. And please let us know if you have any questions. Follow Jessicca on social media. We'll make sure to link all her contact information in the show notes. And we look forward to our next episode.
Thank you so much from the Psychic Girls Next Door.